Laird's dating of 3400 is certainly, that's when it all surfaces, but what seems impossible to account for is that under the circumstances that people are living in at those times, I mean, there's a fair amount of, things are pretty misty when you get back to 3500 BC, but basically you have Neolithic settlements in most places and rather simple sorts of things, like the Dogon themselves. It's a very simple lifestyle that they lead, and then suddenly they've got this incredibly sophisticated science that would appear, unless you can get it by divine inspiration, it would appear to be the result of experiment and deep thought over a long period of time. And my own, I mean, I'm more inclined, since as you said, nothing is provable, but I'm much more inclined to think that this is the result of long periods of development that disappear when this cataclysm hits and the ice age breaks up, and that somehow the knowledge is kept intact, that somewhere it's kept more or less intact, only to resurface as if by magic practically everywhere in the world. I mean, it's India, it's China, it's Mesoamerica, it's Egypt, and then it's even among tribes that you wouldn't anticipate would have this, when you see it with the Dogon and the Maori, and I'm sure if we start looking now we're going to find it with the Oromo and the Eskimos and who else, who knows who, yeah, but everybody seems to have this stuff. Hamlet's Mill shows that precession and astronomical sophistication is written into the mythologies of just about everybody. There's almost nobody that doesn't have it, no matter how, by our standards, simple and primitive the society happens to be. So what's neat about it is that they have to rewrite the whole history of everything. And this is good, because if in their arrogance they're looking at our society as the most advanced that there is, with the nonsense that's going on and the total destruction of just about everything, it's of tremendous importance. It's not just a scholarly quibble, but it's of huge importance to recognize that you can have this advanced knowledge and you don't have to deploy it in the way that we do.
That's right. And if the viewpoint you come from is that the information did come off of our own world, then it almost has to have come from a prior civilization. There's almost no way, I mean, I agree completely, that there's almost no way it could have just spontaneously emerged if it came off of our own planet. Yes, the Maori have almost exactly the same structure with almost exactly the same symbols, and it works the same way, that those who persist in asking the questions are the ones who are allowed to know more. It seems like a really smart way to have set things up. It encourages education, it encourages thinking, it encourages, it also filters out people who are not genuinely serious about the religion. Naturally, the ones who are serious about it are the ones who make it in.
Or about anything. Yeah, it's a way of weeding out the wankers, basically.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's like that in anything. In sport, you want to play professional baseball, those who don't show up and train get cut from the team, and then gradually those who are willing to do the work get initiated. It's as simple enough. There's nothing democratic about that process, but you have to ask the right questions.
But actually, it's completely democratic. From another point of view, that anybody can get in. You don't have to be related to somebody.
Well, and then what happens is that it becomes nepotistic, and it becomes paternalistic, and it becomes hereditary. And as soon as it becomes hereditary, it's doomed. In Egypt, that was the same thing, according to Schwaller anyway, that you couldn't become pharaoh because that was a bloodline thing, but you could become vizier, or chief of the scribes, or chief of the prophets, or whatever, and basically by asking the right questions. Even briefly in Christianity, that was there for a couple of hundred years in early medieval Christianity, where you couldn't become king or or lord of wherever you were born, but you could, at least in theory, become pope.
there's a question I wrestled with for about a year and a half before publishing my book, which was, should I be publishing this at all? That if I'm right about my theory, what business do I have as an author to present this, well, what I see to be internal secrets of a long religious tradition? What right do I have to come forward and present this publicly? The anthropologists, excuse me, the anthropologists who study the Dogon were constrained by ethics of their own profession, and they felt constrained by having been directly initiates of information from priests. I, as an outsider, was not falling under those same constraints, so I had to ask that question for myself. And the conclusion that I came to really comes out of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. It also comes out of the Dogon religion. That whoever put these symbols together and whoever formulated these myths around the symbols didn't make any obvious attempt to hide anything. Everything was laid out in plain view, hidden in plain sight, as I say. You look at the hieroglyphs, and the diagrams from string theory are right there in front of your face. There was no attempt to hide it. So clearly, whoever put this together intended for someone later on down the line to find it. And based on that intention, and based on the idea that there really was no purpose, I could not think of a purpose for encoding this information in the first place if it wasn't intended to be found, I ultimately came to the conclusion that we're supposed to find it. I was also struck by the fact that there's only about 15 or 20 years worth of information here that modern science is not privy to. Modern science is not able to get at directly. So if the original intention of encoding this was to act as a boost for us, to give us a leg up on science, we have about 20 years left to get any benefit out of that. So that if it weren't printed now, then science is not going to get any benefit out of it. I'd like to see an astrophysicist take the Dogon formulation of a cosmic string and see if that solves some of the mathematical problems they have with their equations. Now's the chance to do it.
A lot of people have always thought that they were incorporating this information into their structures in order to, knowledgeably, so that knowing that things were coming unstuck. The Great Pyramid is often thought to be a repository of wisdom, and I've always resisted that. I must say, I always thought they were doing it simply for themselves because it was the best way to pass that information along. Maybe it's both, actually, because I'm thinking this recent work that I've been doing, reading that I've been doing on the yugas and on the cycles of time, and I'm inclined to think that at higher levels of civilization, they understood that it was, let's say, that it was high summer and that autumn was going to follow and then winter, so they wanted something like, exactly like a granary, where you store perfect symbol for where you store the seeds until it's time to plant again. And so it may be that these things all over the world are consciously designed so that they can be passed on over the generations, even when the inner meanings have been completely lost. They still resonate because they're valid, as opposed to some, stupid superstition like Darwinian evolution or something of the sort.
Yes.
But so these things get passed on, and so they serve as both. In other words, in their own time, because they're the simplest, you don't need higher mathematics to understand these things. I mean, we come at them through higher mathematics, and then say, well, gee, maybe we didn't need the math after all. All we had to do was listen to the Dogon.